Hi, my name's Dan, I'm from buildXACT, and I'm going to be showing you through this new version of buildXACT via these tutorial videos. Now, you've probably come here because you are doing a trial of our software or you're wanting to learn more, and it's a great place to start because these videos will cover essentially the same sort of thing I would go through with a class or with people one-on-one. We're going to cover pretty much everything buildXACT has to offer. We're going to start with the estimates, and we're going to go through things like loading plans and doing takeoffs on the screen, costing up items to produce your quote, and then finally producing the quote itself. We're then going to move on to, if you win the job, the purchasing, scheduling, variations, and invoicing, and go right through that. We're also going to talk about connecting this software with your accounting packs, as well as how much the software costs. And these videos I expect to go for about an hour and a half. So whether you follow along with your software open and actually do as I do, or whether you just watch and take it in, really up to you, but either way I'm sure they will be quite valuable to you. Now let's get a start. So I'm going to load an estimate, and I'm going to start in this estimates section. And you'll see I've got a whole list of estimates I've done in the past. This is a demo account, so a lot of them are just demonstration estimates. And when I'm actually starting a new estimate, there's really three main ways of doing it. For the sake of example today, we're going to go through and start from scratch. We're going to use this plus button up here. But take note that you can also copy old estimates. So I could say, hey, look, I did this Baker Street job and I want to make a copy of it. And I can save myself a whole bunch of time by copying old estimates, because a lot of the stuff will be replicated, will be the same, and you can really just pick and change as you need. And a lot of the stuff will be ready to go from there. When you do that, you're just choosing what parts you need and going copy from here. The third main way of being able to start an estimate is really similar to copying estimates, but it's the idea that you can have a master estimate, or a template as we call it. So you might have different master estimates in here, whether you've made them or you've used our ones. You're able to start from here, build your own. You can also turn estimates into templates, but I'll leave it on the template side of things for now because this is kind of down the track a little bit and don't want to get too bogged down in it. So jumping back to just the estimates, and let's get into it. Let's hit this plus button, and that's going to open this sidebar. You'll notice through the software most of the kind of pop-ups appear from the left and right sides of the screen. And it's going to want to know a couple of things about this new estimate. So first of all, what do we want to call it? I'm going to say 446 Collins Street. I typically use the site address, but it really can be anything. So if you're doing I don't know, like a footy club or something, you could put in the name of the footy club. It's just the title. It can be whatever you want. It's going to want to know what type of building you're doing. You can customize these. You can also type in anything you need to. I'm going to grab single story. Customer name, it will remember repeat customers. So if you do a lot of repeat work, your customers will stay in this list and you can just grab them. Otherwise, just type in whoever. You'll see a lot of my demos have been John Smith. Also, it tracks how the customer actually hears about you. I'm just going to say Google. You can customize these, and I'm just going to hit OK. For a lot of those drop downs that you've seen, they will be found under My Account. So if I just quickly show you where that is, My Account and Setup, you'll be able to change things like your building types, your contact types, customer sources, things like that. It's all going to be found in there. All right, so we are in the details screen, which is the first tab of many as we work through the estimate. And this one is specifically about who we're working for, where we're working, and each of these tabs has an edit button, so we can go in, tell it who the customer is, where they're based. Just a note, we get this question all the time. The address for the customer and the address for the work location don't copy to each other. And that's just for the instance where you might have a new build and the customer doesn't live on the vacant lot. So you can have separate addresses. Let's just say 10. Cool. It's all plugged into Google, so it'll predict, and you can click on addresses and it'll pre-fill it all. It wants to know things like the phone number, email, and all of this stuff will be used later. Again, work location, that's plugged into Google as well. Obviously you can see the map, so it's a bit more obvious. But let's say they live on Spring Street, but the build is Collins Street. There it is. This being Google Maps, you can do anything you can do with Google. So Street View, you can get a satellite view. You can zoom in and get a perspective view. It's actually quite cool. This details screen is also where we're able to load relevant documents. Generally speaking, this is used for subcontractor quotes or permits or OH&S documents, but it's just a Dropbox essentially for this kind of job, and it's specific to this estimate, so you can really put whatever you want into here. It's drop and drag. You can drag stuff in. If you click on it, it'll take you to look for the file that you're wanting. And if I did bring something in, say it's whatever this is, it's an image, it'll ask you to categorize it, and you can choose from the list of items. I'm going to say images, which means that when it comes in, they all get grouped into categories. You've also got this notes section. This is really handy if you're just on the phone to the customer and they've told you something and you just want to jot it down, type it in, save it, and let's just put something relevant. Let's say change to plan, whatever it might be. I'm just kind of making it up. When you save it, it will mark with who saved it, when it was, and what was relevant. Let's move on. All right, so we're in the plans and takeoff screen, and because we're going to do a demo loading plans, we're going to give you some plans to actually load. So this video is all about how to actually download the plans from where we've stored them. If you would rather use your own plans, that's fine. However, the video will then look a little bit different. So I would probably recommend using our plans just for simplicity. I'm going to open a new tab, and this is the link that will be found below the video. It'll be in the description if you're watching this in YouTube. And from here, it'll open and show you the plans. All we're doing is hitting the download button, which is in the top right. It will, depending on your browser, do a few different things. It may give you a bar down the bottom that will say, do you want to open or save? This is giving me a different box saying open or save. Whatever your browser looks like, just click the save option whenever it comes up. So save. It might ask you where to save it. If it does, fantastic. Save it somewhere where you can find it later. I'm just going to put it on my desktop because I know I can find it. If it doesn't ask you where to save it, it'll be in your downloads folder, and I'll touch on that point again a little bit later. Cool, that easy. We've got the files. Move on to the next video. All right, so we are going to load the plans in now, and we're in the plans and takeoff screen. We're just going to click this import button on the right hand side. It's going to want us to either drop the plans in or click to open. I'm going to navigate to where my plans are actually kept. If you downloaded the plans in the previous video and it didn't ask you where to save them, they'll be in your downloads folder, more than likely. If you did save them somewhere and you know where they are, just go find them now. The plans you're looking for are either your own ones, or if you're using ours, they're called Plans Demo S. Find them, and just a side note, you can grab one file in buildXACT. You can also grab 2 or 3 or 4. You can highlight as many as you want, and that's really handy to be able to grab multiple files if your architect sends them that way. I'm going to grab it, open it. It'll pop up with this screen saying, do you want to use high quality? I generally tell people no. It'll slow the program down. The only time you really ever need it is if you have extremely detailed plans, or if you have color plans and you want them to remain as color. But otherwise, don't worry about it. Just click import. It'll have a think about it. And depending on your internet, this can be fast or slow. It'll then ask if you want to scale the plans. And I've been recommending people to say no. You'll have to do it eventually, but my preference is to actually get the plans sorted and get them all lined up just before I actually import them. So I'm using this rotate button here to rotate page 1, because you can see here it's now up the right way. I've actually brought in 2 pages. If you're using our demo plans, it'll be the same for you. They'll both be noted as not scaled. Page 2, however, should be the right way up. I'm going to use the rename button, which is this little blue pen. A little side note, if you're ever not sure of what a button does, put your mouse on it for 2 seconds and it'll tell you. So rename, I'm going to rename this one as elevation. Renaming's less of a big deal if you've just got 2 pages, but much more important and much handier if you've got 20 pages, and as opposed to flicking through them all, you can just find straight away the one you need. I'm going to rename this other one just ground floor. If you're less familiar with building plans, a little trick is you can often just steal the title off the plan. Cool. Both named, neither of them are scaled. What I'm going to do is have you click on the scale button and just say scale all plans. And that's going to take you into a couple of steps. They'll be listed up the top. Step 1, draw a horizontal line on any plan. So rather than you actually typing in what the scale is, we actually do it via a horizontal line and a vertical line. And we do it this way because plans aren't always noted to the right scale. Also, a lot of people will scan paper plans, and sometimes the scanners do funny things to the plans. This is just proven to be much more reliable for us. So I'm going to zoom in on the page. I've got a wheel on my mouse, which I'm using to zoom in, or you can use this little blue thing. I'm moving the page by clicking, holding, and dragging. And I'm zooming right in just to get a really good shot on the line. So finding a horizontal line first, the longer the better, because if you miss by a smidgen, it's less of a big deal. That said, I reckon if you do one thing really well, it should be your scaling. So I've done that. It's going to say step 2, how long is your line? Just a side note, if you've messed up this line, hit this little cancel here. It'll give you another crack at it. I'm going to say 13,920. And next, I'm going to drag the plan down, find this other line. Again, longer the better. This is asking for a vertical line, so that's what I'm looking for. I'm going click. Note that you don't have to be able to see the whole line in the screen at one time. Totally fine to start it, move it, and it'll just keep remembering. Again, it wants to know the length, 11 to 60. Finish, and Bob's your uncle. So in this case, both plans were the same scale. I knew that, and that's why I used the scale button originally that said scale all plans. If, for example, you had 5 pages at 1 to 100 and 1 at 1 to 50, you would at this point need to go back, find that 1 to 50 and rescale it, as it wouldn't pick up that odd one out, so to speak. If you ever need, say for example you've got a plan that doesn't have both a horizontal line and a vertical line, you can use this function where you can copy scale from one page to another. That can be really handy, and that can also be handy if you've got multiple pages that are odd pages out, as we kind of call it. As you can copy scale from one, you'll note it's giving you a little bit of info down here, plan scale copied, and you can paste it onto other pages. Fantastic. You can come back to this plan and take off screen at any time. We're probably going to come back at some point during the tutorials, because this is where all the takeoffs will be listed out. You can always add more plans. You can print pages of plans. You can print takeoff views. And you can do takeoffs in this screen. However, what I train people to do, or the way I train people to run through this program, just because I think it's better this way and simpler, is I train people to do their takeoffs when they're actually costing for things. So in the spirit of that, we're going to jump through to costing now. Awesome. So we're in the costing screen. You'll notice a couple of things, mainly these cost categories. These are just our default cost categories that we've given you. They're a great starting point, and they're typically set up as a whole house build. Depending on what kind of work you do, they may not be 100% suited to you, but don't worry about it, because you can open them and edit them, change the names. You can delete them if you don't want them. You can mark them as not required. You can also grab them, reorder them if the order is not right for you. I'm just dragging them, and when I drop it, it'll release it. And if you're copying old estimates, these categories and items are part of what you can copy. So if you are doing really consistent type of work, and it's going to have consistent categories, consistent items, this screen particularly is a really good one to be able to copy. Awesome. So open up preliminaries, and if you click on the plus, you can add a new item here. And if you start typing, say, insurance, you'll see it starts to pop up with different items it thinks you're looking for. Basically, it's looking for keywords. So it's looking for the word insurance through a whole bunch of different price lists. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to jump to the price list screen. If you want to come along and you're following along on your own browser and you want to jump through to pricing, that's fine. But what I'd recommend is you do what I do here, which is right click on the price list button and open in a new tab. On a Mac, it'll be Control and click. On a PC, it's just a normal right click. Open in a new tab, and that means that we can stay in this estimate, but also look at something else. That's a really cool feature of this new version, that you can be in multiple things at the same time. All I want to show you is this price list screen, and this is essentially where all the prices are coming from. So when I'm searching, this is where the prices are living, where they're based. For most of you, you would just have this buildXACT one. I've got a lot of price lists in here that I've also loaded. These have come from Excel. So what I've actually done is get Excel price lists from suppliers, load them in, and that's what they've become, is these price lists in here. There are other videos to show you how to load price lists. I won't spend time on it now, but the main point of showing you this is just to touch on the buildXACT list, which will cover off on all the different prices we've got. There's about 1,000 prices in here, and about 60-ish% are material, about 40-ish% are labor. They're a really solid start. They're supposed to be a ballpark figure, so they are purposefully generic, but if you're stuck for a price, they're here for you. Cool. What I'm going to do is close this tab. If you're still following along for this bit, be really sure just to click on the X for this tab only. Otherwise the whole browser closes and you'll be up the creek a little. So now that we're back in the estimate, I'm just going to grab any of these. I'm going to grab this first insurance one, and this should be the one that's also in your account. And you'll notice that this line has several different options and buttons. So things like recipes and the calculator and takeoff tools, markup. We're going to get to all of them eventually, but I'll start with a few simple ones. And first of all, specifications. So thinking ahead a little bit, we're going to be putting together an inclusion and specification style list to go on our quote. And this S here dictates whether this description actually appears in that specification list. So really good for PC costs or just general things like insurance that you want to advise your client about. You can click the S, saves a lot of retyping because it copies the descriptions across. T is for task or timeline, whatever makes more sense to you. Basically, we're building a work flow, a work timeline down the track to actually show when all the work's getting done. And this is happening after we create the job, but we're thinking ahead to actually what tasks need to be on there. And by clicking T or unclicking T, we're working out whether it needs to be there or not. Typically speaking, less is more when it comes to your schedule. I advise people generally just to have labor items and important stages through the build, but it's more a personal preference thing. So experiment with it a bit and see what works for you. I've searched for one item and grabbed it. By the same token, it's perfectly fine to type stuff in. So if I've got a permit fee or an admin fee or anything like that, oh, it's found one anyway, but I can just type stuff in. I'm typing in the unit and the unit cost. So $300 and leaving the quantity as 1. Again, I'll specify it to the client. Awesome. So once I've done with this, I'm going to click Save, and you'll notice that each of these categories has a little symbol. What this is intended to be a checklist of sorts. So you can say, well, it's complete, or it's not complete, or it's in fact not required, which we'll come to a bit later. But if I say complete, it'll also save it, but it'll tick it as well. And that just ticks it off to say, yep, done with it. I'm going to jump through and just show you the not required one. Say there's no hire items, in fact, in this job. It will just zero it out, cross it off, and it removes it from your final quote. Awesome. So we're now going to do a meter squared takeoff for bricks. So I'm going to jump down to our bricks category, click it to open it, and add a bricks item using this plus. I'm going to pick one from our buildXACT list, so you'll have these prices as well. If I go bricks, plural, with an S on the end, you'll get these PC cost bricks, which I think are great because a lot of the time you're specifying brick before you know the exact type. I'm going to say $8.50 per thousand is what this means. So bricks PC $8.50 per thousand. And it's filled out everything but the quantity. So this is where the takeoff actually becomes really handy. I am going to specify this to the client as well. I'm going to grab this takeoff tool, which is the little builder's triangle. Hit that one. It'll take us back to our plans. And for the brick takeoff, I prefer the elevation plans, but you can do it on this top view plan in the same method that we'll do plaster later on. But I'm going to go elevation for now. I'm zooming in. You'll notice this takeoff is specific to bricks. We actually do one takeoff per item as we need. And you can reuse takeoffs, so you won't have to do every single thing. You've also got your total square meterage up here. And because we're working in square meters, we've got these specific tools. If we were doing linear meters or cubic meters or counting things, we'd have different tools. I'm going to use the star tool, which is the polygon. And I think it's the most useful because it's where you can click in each corner. These are steps, by the way, so there's going to be brick behind them. Click in each corner and it defines your shape for you. My labels are not on for this job, so I'm just going to click on this little tag here. Your labels might be on already, but you can show and hide them as they sometimes get in the way, but at the same time they're really handy. If you need to change the color or delete single shapes, that's where the label comes in. You can change color. When we do roof pitch, you can change the pitch if you need to, or you forget to add the pitch. And you can also remove individual shapes, as well as change the name of them. If I draw a shape and I want to undo the last shape I drew, I can undo up here. And that's just one shape at a time. If I want to undo all shapes, I can use this one and it wipes the whole slate. I am going to now remove the windows. So I'm going to grab this one up here, which is a deduction tool. It looks like a kind of the top of a money box. Click it. I'm going to grab the rectangle just because I think it's quicker to do rectangular objects with this tool versus the polygon. And I'm going to click top left one time and then one time in the bottom right. So just 2 clicks and that's your window. So you can repeat that. You'll notice it's just bringing this, oh, didn't click a second time. You'll notice it's just bringing this overall total down. And if I go, oh, I don't know about the shape, did a bit of a rubbish job, I can remove it and redo it. Awesome. I'll turn deductions off. And what I'm doing in this case, I'm just going to do one aspect. If I was doing this for real, I'd do all the aspects. And a little trick that I find really handy is if I'm doing all aspects, I do all the positive area first, i.e. all the walls. And then I go through and pull out windows. What that achieves is it means I'm not flicking this deduction tool on, off, on, off, on, off. And there's less chance I'll have it on when it's supposed to be off or vice versa. Awesome. One question we sometimes get is what do I do if I can't see part of the building? There's an elevation with an alcove in it. I mentioned earlier that you can use the ground floor plan in the same way that we'll do plaster, and it's perfectly fine to draw over more than one plan. So for example, I could draw on that elevation, come in, do the little alcove bit as needed, and then flick back to the other page. So that's how I would address that issue. In this case, I haven't shown you the line tool yet, so I'll skip over it, but it'll make more sense once you've seen that tool. Let's say accept, which will grab the figure, drop it straight back into here, which gives you your total. Notice that this is a raw figure, as in there's no wastage. All the takeoff measurements will save this way, they won't have wastage on them. And that's so that when you need to add wastage, you can do it just line by line. I'm going to click this calculator here, which will pop this out from the right hand side. And this calculator is fantastic for rounding, wastage. We get this question a lot. What on earth is M7? It might be a different number for you. Basically, that's your measurement number. So as it's going through doing takeoffs, it's numbering all the takeoffs, measurement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The takeoff I just drew was measurement number 7. That's all it is. We can say 5% wastage, 10%, whatever you want. It goes way up to 75, which is for things like bulking up for dirt if you're doing excavation. But 5% is probably all right for us. Depends on your brickie, I suppose. We'll say equals. And what that will do is update this figure. Save. And that's our brick takeoff. Just a side note, if I wanted to add a new item, we get this question as well. Can I reuse measurements? Yeah, absolutely. If I wanted to reuse that measurement for a brick layer, I'll grab this out of our price list because I know it's there. By the way, if you want to change the rates, 100% fine to type over the top. You can say, actually, my guy charges 45 a square meter, no problem. But you can go calculator. All you're doing is picking that measurement 7 out of that list again. Measurement 7, add wastage if you want, but I probably wouldn't for labor, but up to you. Equals, and there it is. Would I put this on the schedule? Probably as a labor item. Would I specify it? Probably not. I'm going to say complete, and we'll move on. So we're going to do a plaster takeoff now. I'm going to open category 14. And I'm going to add an item. We're going to do a takeoff. We're actually going to do 2 takeoffs, one for the walls, one for the ceiling, and then we're going to have a third line item for the plasterer themselves. So first one first, plaster. I know I've got a 10 mil board in here. And I am going to do a takeoff for it. Great, so this is the line tool. If you watched the last video, we were talking about it being able to be used for brickwork as well. This line tool is fantastic for anything vertical. Anytime you want to take a square meterage off a vertical plan like this or a top plan like this, you can use the line, and you can say, the line of specified height, in this case 2700. I've cheated, I've looked at the elevation, but all it's going to do now is say, I'll zoom in a bit more. All it's going to say now is, great, length times height. The height we gave it, the length it's measured, gives us 9.29 square meters. I am going to turn the labels off and show you how I do plaster. Just a note in that there's actually a few different ways to do this plaster measurement. This is just how I prefer, but if you have another way that you prefer a little bit better, that's fine. All I really want to get across is how this tool works and how you can use it to your advantage. Cool. What I'm doing is when I get to a corner like this one, I'm double clicking, which will stop a line, start a new one, and that's the quickest way around. One point as well, particularly relevant to this, if you move your mouse while you click, it'll think you're trying to move the plans and it will not click as you're hoping. I'll just go to there for now. So cool, 113 square meters. You'd get the idea if you're going around the whole house. One point is, as there's going to be wet boards in the bathroom, I will leave that blank. So I'd actually just go around like this. Possibly for the laundry as well, depends on how you want to do it. But I would actually do the bathroom as a separate plasterboard takeoff because it's going to have a different type of plasterboard in it. Cool, so that's going to get all the walls. My preference now is to change the color, change the height, and I'm going to do above the doorways. So if we've got 2700 walls and 2100 doors, then we're going to have a 600mm gap. And I'm just going to allow for that above the doorways. In my mind, green is always 600. That's why I've changed the color. If you want to be doubly sure, you can turn the labels on. I turn them off because, well, it's obvious. But you can quite easily see the ones on top are the most recent. These are 600, these are 2700. If I've changed this height, it's only for things I'm about to draw. And worst comes to worst, if I forget to change it, I can always go in and it's got the height here. So if I draw it and I go, oh, damn it, should have changed it, you can always go in and change it later. One question we always get about plaster is, do I remove the windows? It's entirely up to you. My take on it is that it's still going to be cut out of a whole sheet and probably disposed of, so you're still paying for the sheet. So in that case, it's probably not worth it. But some people do want to take that into account. If you do, it's just a matter of using the deduction tool, specifying the height of the window, and drawing across the width of the window. So all it's doing, I'll just do one actually to show you. I'm going to say deduction, maybe a different color. 1800 for this window I'm going to do. There to there. If you put the labels on again, it's a real mess, but minus 1.58 square meters, you can see what it's doing. So yeah, you can absolutely take out windows. Again, it's entirely up to you if you do. Side note, this plaster, I'm clicking accept by the way, this plaster can be reused for paint measurement. So although it's a little fiddly, it's still easier than doing it by hand, and it can be reused for several different things. I'm going to say calculator and wastage 5%. I'm going to add a new item for ceiling plaster. There we go. Little bit of info. You'll really quickly get used to the keywords it likes. And this version is really good about being able to search for multiple keywords. So it doesn't matter if there's spaces and things like that. But you'll quite soon get the hang of what words it wants. And worst comes to worst, you can't find something, use this magnifying glass here. What that'll do is give you a better view of it. So I can go plaster, and this will now show me all the lists that Plaster's found in. So this is good if you want to search by supplier. Let's go again. This is my demo account. I've got a few little test ones in here, but you know, I might have it in buildXACT and it'll show me what categories it falls under. So I've got internal and external walls that contain plaster. And we'll touch on this more later, but it's showing both recipes and single items, where a recipe is a group of items, so like a composite rate, but it's showing both in the results here. Cool, I'm grabbing that ceiling plaster. The reason I do them separately, one, it's easier, two, they're often different prices. And take off. I'm just going to do this quite quickly, but I'm changing it back to red just because that's what I prefer. And I am using the polygon to draw the roof area. Not too worried about walls, just straight over the top. If you really want to shortcut this, you could use the slab area or a floor measurement that would be the same or very, very similar. It really depends just how quick and easy you want to make it. However, that took 2 seconds. Accept. Lovely, 2 measurements. Again, wastage. Little side note, I've done wastage every time, but if you are copying estimates, the wastage is remembered from the last one. So if you go down the copying estimates path or master templates path, you can definitely get away with copying them. Last one for the plaster, I'm going to go plasterer. Grab this price here, plasterer to sheet and set. The only reason I'm doing this one is just because I want to show you something that I think is quite cool. And that is calculator. The fact that I can grab more than one measurement. So I can go that one plus that one, basically wall plus ceiling equals, and it just puts them together. Although it's easy to add that and that together, the reason I'm doing this is, if I save this and say it's complete, the reason I'm doing it is that it's saving all the measurements here, and they're connected, essentially. Which means that I can actually go back and edit them. If I was to edit them, it would update the number, and that number would then update the values that I've got here. So definitely the best practice is to, rather than just type in numbers, where possible, is to reference the actual takeoff measurement, either by clicking the takeoff button or selecting the measurement from the calculator. And that way, if you need to change the measurement later, you can really easy do it in the takeoff measurement screen and know full well that it's changing all the relevant measurements in the costing section. Usually that'll be, you give a quote to someone and they say, no, too expensive, can you change it? And you can just change a couple of takeoffs and issue the quote really quickly back to them. All right, so we're going to do a roof takeoff now. So category 10, open that up, and I'm going to grab any roof material that's relevant to the plan. In this case, I know this house has tiles on it, so I'm going to search for tiles. However, this example is less about the material and more about the actual takeoff tool that we've got here. So I'm going to go tiles and just grab this one, terracotta tiles, battens. If you ever see M and L in our price list, material and labor is what it means. And this is also a PC cost item. I'm going to go takeoff tool, which I'm going to specify it first. Takeoff tool, and awesome. I'm going to zoom in. We're in meters squared again. And I'm going to use the polygon, but before I do, I'm going to tell it what pitch it's at. You'll notice it goes blue. And this is a cool thing about the takeoff section. When something's in use, it goes blue. The exception being the drawing color, which is obviously the color that it is. Awesome, polygon. Now, this one isn't the most ideal example because it doesn't really have eaves, but what you'd be using is either a floor plan with the roof edge shown or your roof diagram itself. Either, but you're just following the edge. A side note is that if you've got multiple pitches, in the area. So just say, for example, say I'm up to this point now, say for example the porch and the actual roof section that then joined it was 45 degrees. I would actually go in here and draw it as two different sections, but this roof's all the same, so I'm just going to draw the whole lot. Long story short, it's entirely fine to have more than one section at more than one pitch. Fantastic. And as I touched on before with the line height, the pitch is in here. If you need to change it or you mucked it up and didn't put it in, you can go in and do it. Accept. And as always, I'm just going to add a little bit of wastage. Complete. Perfect, but that's how the roof pitch tool works. That roof, just by the way, the pitch tool is also available for lineal lines. So if you want to do capping or anything like that, you can also do it just as a lineal line. So it's not only for meter squared, it's also available to do anything lineal on your roof. Awesome, so I'm going to go up to electrical, and I'm going to use this as an example for identifying individual things on the plan. This particular set of plans doesn't have an electrical plan. It's really, really simple, but I'm still going to show you how it works, and it's still going to be a good example, because what we can do is, if we go Downlights, for example, we can grab either the recipe, which again we'll touch on in a bit, or the item and installation, which is what I'm going to do here. It'll drop it in. I can go take off tool. One question we get is, how does it know what units I want? And just really quickly, I'll go back. It's based on this. So whatever unit the item is, that's the unit you'll be drawing in. In the same capacity, that's where it's pinching this name. That's just the item description. Awesome. So because it's in each, it then goes, oh great, it's a point. Just gives you this little dot, and you can go, yep, one there. Turn these labels off. Maybe there's one under the porch. Maybe there's one, two down the hall, toilet, one in the bath, maybe two in the bath. If you had the electrical plan, as I said, you would be just following that, but you can just draw it out this way as well. And this can be really handy if you don't have an electrical plan specified, because you can also print these out. So you could give this to a trade and say, hey, this is roughly where the points are going. Or the downlights in this case. Cool. You can, if need be, go in, change the description. So if you want to add little notes, you could say, bedroom 1, just anything like that, and it can actually make specific notes to specific dots. Accept, and perfect. I will say T for timeline, because this is an installation one, it's going to take some time. And complete. What we're going to do next actually is the plumbing quote, and that's going to touch on a very similar principle to if we were getting an electrical quote, because a lot of the time electrical, plumbing, and possibly roofing, trusses, there's often a lot of things that are quoted out, so I'm going to just show you how to put a quote in. Alright, so this video is just about how to show a plumbing quote, but as previously mentioned, it can be used for anything that you're quoting out. And it's a really simple concept. I'm just going to add an item to the category we want. So I usually just say quote. You can, as this description is getting used later for purchase orders and costing and possibly even on the schedule if you want it, you can specify who's doing it. So maybe it's John's Plumbing. Or you can make any notes to yourself as well. So anything that goes in here, you'll see later. You can just say it's a quote for your unit. You could say each, or anything that makes sense per job. And how much they quoted, so 10 grand. Something to note, it says it all over the place, but just to stress it, this is excluding GST because it's going to add it back in later. I'm going to put this on the specification. And let's go complete. Just a side note as well, I've put it as one lump figure, but that doesn't mean that I can't split it up when it comes to purchasing. In fact, that's what we're going to do, is split this into, say, rough in and fit off. And yeah, perfectly fine just to drop it in here as one figure. The whole point of this is just to get that dollar allowance in at this point. I would probably equally also be at this point putting the quote in the details section in that little document spot that we touched on earlier. All right, final takeoff example. I'm going to go into framing and I'm just going to show you lineal meters because that's the only one we haven't actually touched on yet. I'm going to add an item. I'm going to search for some timber. If doing timber, I usually search by the strength grade just because it's an easy thing to find and it's almost always in the description. Whereas if you search 90 by 45, some ones will have a space between them, some will use the X, some will use a multiplication symbol, whereas the strength grade is almost always there. I'm going to say that one. And I'm going to make a note, this is my bottom plate. I've saved it before, that's handy. And I'm just going to go straight through to my takeoff tool and draw it out. Cool. So the point of doing the bottom plate first is that it's a great measurement to get essentially all the walls captured, and you can use it later to then calculate number of studs. You can use it for nogs, you can use it for your single top plates. And while I won't do all the framing, I'll touch on how I would proceed after this to do a bit more. But first, let's measure it. I'm going to grab this polygon. And the polygon, when you're in lineal meters, is very similar to the square meterage one. The only difference is if I wanted to do a three-sided shape, let's just say there, 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 you'll be left with this other side, so the polygon has to finish. So if you want to do a three-sided shape, best to use 3 lines. Just a little side note. Best you know before you get to the doorway and you're stuck. I'm going to use it just because I'm going to go right round anyway. So just like this, following the timber line. Again, green dot, that's something that we saw in the square meter one. I'm going to use this line and just fill in the walls. I go straight across doors. I'm going to get these labels switched off. Again, you can double click if you need to. But super quick, all the measurements we can do, in a fraction of the time. Awesome, so that's all of that. Everything else is brick, I believe. Lovely. 75 meters, I'm going to go accept. I'm going to now add wastage, as we have before. So 5% and equals. Cool. And from here, I'm not going to go through the whole framing process, but I'll just leave you with the fact that from here I'd create multiple lines, and I would have, you know, lines for my top plate. I've just cut and paste that. I would have lines from my top plate, my bottom plate, my studs, and for studs I would use the calculator. I'll just show you briefly to say bottom plate divided by, which you can do 0.45 for 450 centers or 0.6 for 600 centers, and that'll give you the number of studs, and then you can change it to price per stud. Alternatively, you can change that a bit further and have it do the full lineal meters, where it's going total lineal meters of the base plate to the number of studs by dividing it by the centers, and then each stud will be a certain height, and the height is 2.7. So that's now giving us total lineal meterage of the studs that we're going to use. I would also go through and do junction studs, so I'd count those as an each item. I'd also draw around the areas that we're going to have a double top plate, and I'd have a separate takeoff for that. But look, I don't want to recreate how people do framing now. I just really want to show the tools that we've got, and honestly, people do their takeoffs for framing so many different ways that I really just want to leave people with what the methods that they're kind of in place with already. I'm going to go complete, and that'll leave us there. All right, one thing I want to touch on, and it's going to be really handy for some users, and some users won't really engage with it at all, and that's the recipes. I'm going to go into doors, and if I go add an item, if I search for, let's say, door, I've touched on this already. Some items will be a stack of cards, which is the composite recipe. Some are just single, which have no symbol. And I could go, if I want to flick through the recipes in more detail, I could go build recipe. I can build my own, or I can select existing ones, which is a good way of just being able to search through them. You're going to have your own recipes, which are ones I've built. You probably won't have any yet. You've got buildXACT recipes, which you definitely will have. And we've got about 100. They're really good starting points. If I just say, look, internal door passage set, click it. This is a great example of a recipe. The whole premise is that you can measure in one unit. So it might be that you're measuring a slab in square meters, or you are measuring a wall in lineal meters, or in this case, measuring openings in units of each. And then for every click in this case, it's allocating 11 meters of skirt, 11 meters of labor, and it's got locks. It's got the actual door itself, but it's a really quick way to drop several items in there based on just one measurement. Also a really good way just to be able to convert things. So for example, you'll notice it's measuring in each, but it's actually spitting out lineal meters. A lot of users who love recipes love them because they can measure, say, bricks in square meters and then convert like this to number of bricks. And there's a lot of different examples like that where you can actually convert it to bags of cement or tubes of glue, anything like that, and it can be a lot more useful in purchasing. One thing with recipes, if you're very new to buildXACT and you're just wrapping your head around it, it's probably a later kind of thing. We've had some users who jump right in and kind of go down the recipe rabbit hole a little bit, and it can be really easy to do. If you're just wanting to wrap your head around, I'd probably wrap my head around the items and just using it for a normal quote without recipes first, and then focus on recipes later. but definitely worth knowing, and that's why I wanted to cover it in a video. Note that you can also save your own recipes. You can also add items. You can build your own. So your recipes can be almost anything you want. The final thing we have to do in this estimate is make some money. You would have noticed already that as we've gone through, each item has its own markup, and that's to allow for the people that want to add markup per item. My preference and the way I generally train is to have people use this overall markup. It's so much quicker, it's so much easier, and it just gives you a lump sum at the end, which is really nice. So I would go through and add, say, profit 15, contingency 3, and overhead 3. You can add whatever categories you want. You can add whatever percents you want. I get asked all the time what standard percent, what is a standard percent for a builder to put in, and I generally see about 20-ish% as reasonably standard, but I try to describe to people that there's no real standard because different people will cost differently. They'll allow different lump sums. So the profit is really up to the individual as well. However you do it, you'll be able to do it through here. You can even put in things like travel allowance if you want, if it's a more remote job. Rounding is in here too. So if you want to round this final figure to nearest 100,000, which is probably a bit greedy, more likely 10 or 100, you can do that too. However, a lot of our clients tell us that to have the decimals make it look less like a guess. So we don't see that getting used a whole bunch. Entirely up to you if you use it or not. So that's our lump sum for markup, and that's done with the quoting side of it. All right, so we're going to go through the specifications now, and what we've been doing, I'm just going to scroll up and go to here. What we've been doing as we've gone through is used this little S button that we would have touched on a few times to grab individual items like this. So all of those are here. Just to note, categories 1 to 8 are where these are coming from. These are default buildXACT ones. They're here just to give you a hand. You can by all means mix the ones you've added in with them. So you can put plumbing in here and roofing in somewhere and preliminaries right at the start. You can definitely mix them up so that your ones mix in with the buildXACT ones. You can definitely edit ours. You can delete lines. You can change them, whatever you want. What I really recommend to people is if you've got a really crash hot set of specifications and you've added it in here, save it. I've got 4 sets here. I've put them in here as a kind of demonstration that you can have all different types. Often we see, silver, gold, bronze types of specs. Other times we'll see renovation versus extension and new build. And, we might see bathroom. We see different types of build. It really depends on the work you do. But long story short, you can save your specs. Another really cool thing you can do is add photos. So if I want to tell the client, a bit more about the item, I tend to think this is quite good if you are chatting with a client and let's say they're really excited about their new kitchen. You can kind of feed that a little bit just by adding photos of what they're getting. It also sets you apart a little bit from other quotes. It means you've listened to them a little bit more. You've understood that they're really into their kitchen. That's what they're really dreaming about, and you've addressed that. It just puts you apart from other quotes. these photos, I've saved them on my computer. If I needed to grab them from somewhere, I can grab them from catalogs online, or Google is definitely your friend. I'm going to just open another tab, and I'm going to cut and paste. I can right click, copy, and right click paste. Or if you are more familiar with the shortcuts, Control and C, Control and V will do the same thing. If you're on a Mac, Command and C, Command and V will do the same thing, but all I'm wanting to do is just copy and paste it. Google's definitely your friend, as I said, because you can get images of things. In this case, our ovens. You can go in, you can find the oven you want. If you have a particular one in mind, model numbers are super handy because you can quickly find what you need. You can right click. On a Mac, it's Command and click, and you can save the image. Save it to your computer somewhere. Let's just save it on the desktop for now. I'll call it oven. And I'm going to go back here, back to the other tab. Click to the image, and where did I put it? Desktop, oven. Lovely. And in it goes. So these show on your quote, and as I said, they look great. Awesome. If you want to put a little brief about your specs, this is the spot to do it. It'll just sit above the actual specifications when the quote prints out. And that's about it for specs. So we're up to the point where we're actually printing this quote out. I'm going to go quote letter. And this is going to have really three aspects to it. So one is, what do you want your cover letter to look like? Two is, what do you want your T's and C's to say? And three is, how much of all the work you just did do you want your client to see? Your cover letters, well, this is a default buildXACT one. You can change them. You can save sets of them. I've got a client set here. You can include them when you copy estimates. This was for John. If you're pulling in cover letters from elsewhere, this Word button is really handy, as is the paste text tool. Note that you can do formatting, you can add images, you can change the text styles, you can do quite a lot with this editor. If you're pulling in cover letters from elsewhere, this Word button is really handy because you can just dump it from the Word document you already had. As is this copy text button. You can dump images in here, tables, you can use formatting. There's a lot of things you can do with this editor. Jump through terms and conditions. Again, buildXACT default ones. Change them, set them as your own. I've even seen people put signature panels in here for clients to sign off on. That's fine too. And print options. So this is where you are going to determine all of the items that actually show on the quote. So how much of the work you just did should show up on this quote. This is where it's going to be important to have logos and that kind of thing, your details on the quote. So what I'm going to do is click on my account and right click on account details and open that in a new tab. So again, to get that right click is, well, it's on a PC, it's easy, it's a right click and new tab. On a Mac, it's command click, and that will give you those options. The reason I'm opening this in a new tab, and if you're following along, it's probably a good idea for you to do the same. This is where all your account details per se are stored. So things like your ABNs, your logo, obviously, all of that good stuff. You can go in and edit them. You can tell it the time zone, which is really important later if you start sending SMSs. you can also select, if you're an overseas customer, what your ABN equivalent is for where you're based. You can select your tax rates, things like that. So if you're in a part of the world that's got a 15% tax rate like New Zealand, you can change it there, and also change what it's called if that's relevant to you. So if you need to, take a second and update this. When you're done, head back to your estimate, and if your quote, if your logo doesn't show straight away, you may just need to refresh the page, which you can do with this button, or F5 on your keyboard will do the same thing. It's perfectly fine to refresh this one, and what that'll do is just make sure it's grabbing the latest stuff. Your logo is one of those things. Great, so I'm just going to say quote valid for 30 days, that's fine. I want it to show, do I want all these items? Probably not. You can definitely play around with this and see what suits you. I'm going to show you kind of a typical quote that will come out from our software. So often people will say, yep, quoted items and show me a cost breakdown. However, some of the quotes will definitely come out without that as well, so you can turn it off. But for this example, I'm going to leave that on because I think it's quite a good thing to show you. So pick and choose and print when you're ready. It'll open in PDF, Excel, and Word, and you can take your pick. PDF's just ready to go to the client. It's easy, anyone can view it. If it's got links in it, like websites, you can, like this one, your client can click it straight away. Excel Word is editable, so if you need to change anything, that's perfect. But PDF, is generally the way to go. Awesome, so it's going to have everything above this line here will be yours, if you're following along. And this will be info about the quote, this section here. And then cover letter, which we just touched on. It'll move down into specs and inclusions, plus any photos we've got, which are generally a reasonably good size. We kind of thought that if we put them in and they were small, people are going to call anyway, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So there are your specs. Now I chose for it to show this way, with the quoted categories having a breakdown. It's going to have your GST included, and markup is also split between all these categories. Just to show you that, we originally put this plumbing quote in as 10 grand, and it's added both GST and markup to that. As I said, I chose for this to show. This would be one of those things that you could definitely remove if you didn't like it. Down, 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 final figure, T's and C's. And that's the quote they get. I'm just going to go back to the tab I've got open and close it. Again, be sure to close the right one or you'll be a bit upset. And it'll give you this box, and I can just close that. I've got the option to email the quote to the client directly, which I can definitely do. It'll have grabbed their email already. I can choose to have a copy sent to myself. I can add the contents of that email. If I want any attachments, like standard documents, it's just pulling from anything I had in both my standard documents, which I'll in a second show you where it is, and also anything I loaded specific to this job in that document section. The standard documents I'm talking about are found in my account, business documents. So we've got some default ones in there, but do have a play around there if you're interested. Last but not least, we've shown how you can print for the client. You may be interested in printing for yourself, and that's just found in costing. As a rule of thumb, if you're poking around the software yourself, this little cog you'll see 90% of the time it's going to have print buttons in it, and this is where you can print a full breakdown of all of your items with quantities and figures, markup, and is a really good thing to have on site. However, on that note, you can also use this on your mobile. And although we don't touch specifically on that too much in these training videos, if you log in via Safari on your iPhone or iPad, or just a browser on your Android phone or Android tablet, you'll be able to access exactly the same kind of thing that you can get on your desktop computer. All right, so I'm going to go and create this job. And what this is going to physically do, I'm just going to bring across an image and just show you. Fantastic. So if you've never used the old version of buildXACT, completely ignore this left-hand side. If you have, this is just a comparison. This right-hand side is showing how what we've been doing so far is number one. We've just played with the estimate side of it. I'm now creating this job, which is going to open up, I guess, number two. And I kind of call this a negotiating step because it's perfect for when you are backing and forthing with a client. You may want to play with some of the purchasing, maybe put your schedule together. You've pretty much won the job, but it's not signed off just yet. And there may still be a couple more estimate tweaks just to go. The final step, which we'll come to a bit later on, is where you actually sign the contract and lock the estimate down. For now, we're just going to be working in number two, and we'll touch a bit more on this one later. So when I'm creating the job, it'll ask things like, does this all look good? Is this your contract total? This is also where you can choose contract price or cost plus. We don't touch too heavily on cost plus in this video, but there's definitely going to be other videos on our page that will deal with cost plus. It'll want to know, do you want default invoices? And that's going to be for your invoicing section, where you can have standard master builders HIA style contracting, where it's 5, 10, 15% invoices. I'm going to say yes in this example and okay. And as mentioned, this is going to open up the part two, where we can now play in both the job and the estimate. If I flick back, this is where we've ended up. This is the job, and I can at any time go back to the estimate. You'll notice you've got your details, which all come across. All the maps are still here. And just a side note, if you ever needed to, you could create the job just on its own. If you just want to do a cost plus and start straight from here, or you knew what the contract figure was and you didn't need to estimate it in buildXACT, you can start just from a job. All right, so let's have a look at the scheduling side of it now. And if you were familiar with the old version, you'll notice straight away that the scheduling and costing sections are separate. If you're not familiar with the old version, disregard that, it's not a worry. Basically what we're wanting people to do with the schedule is really take a kind of less is more approach and really focus on the key items through the build. Typically these will be labor, and in fact all of mine are. These items are here because I selected the T back in the estimate. However, once I'm here, I can add more items to this category or any category. I can also add more categories. And one thing I want to kind of go through straight up is the relationship between the categories and the subcategories, or the parents and kids as they get called in kind of programming speak. The parent task can't be dragged around or can't be moved. The whole purpose of it is to show what's going on underneath. So if I was just to add another item to this category, another child, let's say new task, let's just call it another item, brick item. You'll notice that this parent task is just showing the duration from the start of this one to the end of that one. If I say this is partly complete, it's updating this. It's just a summary, that's all it is. Really the only thing you can actually do with it is update the progress, which is kind of cool if you've got a whole bunch of items within a parent category and you just want to update them all at once. You can drag the progress around and it'll work out where that is up to based on the days within the category. So based on the number of days in the children tasks that are inside that category. That can be really handy. But other than that, you really can't do a lot with these parent tasks. The schedule itself is supposed to be very, very simple to use. So we've got this progress little triangle that you can drag around. If that isn't your thing, you can click on the task, you can toggle progress, which is really cool. You can just jump it up from 25 not started to 25 to 50 to 75. That's quite handy. If you want to be really more specific than that, you can go edit. You can also double click on the little item itself and you can get to this screen where you can mess around with it more. We'll come back to this in a sec because we're going to do a bit more with this edit screen. You can drag around the kid tasks. I'm going to stumble over that one a few times. You can drag them around. You can change the start and finish dates of these. So this is the start date. This little crosshatch area at the end is the end date. You can alter that. Again, progress on this one. And everything's color coded. So orange is in progress. Black is not started, but not overdue either. So if you pull it back, you'll see green is actually today. Red is overdue. If I, for this task, actually say, hey, look, we've started working on it, 50%, it'll go back to orange. So even though it's overdue, we've started working on it, it's all right. One cool thing you can do is, let's say, this is a prime example, the plaster can't go up until the, say the rough-in for the electrical is done. So I'm going to join that one to that one just by grabbing the first dot on that one, dragging it to the second, get a little arrow. And what that means is if I move this first task now, it will shift the second one. You can add non-working days to your schedule. So typically public holidays, maybe your birthday if you don't want to work it. You click the numbers up the top and it'll let you choose that day as a non-working day. Alternatively, you can go in through this cog and choose them in here. And if you select a non-working day, it'll be remembered through all the jobs that you've got. So in theory, you really only have to do them once a year. Awesome. One other note, just on this cog while I've got it open. So far I've been setting these dependencies, these joining arrows, that's what they're called, separately. And I can also use them automatically. If I select that, I tend to think this is quite good for setting up. Actually, I'm just going to click this little bar over here and get a bit more real estate. You can minimize this bar, it's a cool thing to know. If I use them automatically and I move something, it treats everything below as dependent, so it'll then update everything below that item. I tend to think you'll be flicking these on and off a lot. There it goes, jumps forward. And if you are using the manual ones, I'll just move that back, and you want to delete them, you can double click on the manual ones and delete the links. Awesome. You can also print these schedules. They're fantastic for clients. And because we are able to get this job section before the contracts are actually accepted, meaning before we've actually locked down our estimate, we can actually jump through to here and print them or export them for the client and even send them with a quote. So that's another really cool thing. By default, it will exclude weekends from its counting, from its durations. So if you've got a task that goes over the weekend, it'll be, say, Friday to Monday will be 2 days, Friday and Monday. You can turn it off if you want it to count weekends, but by default it doesn't. Awesome, that's the schedule. I'm going to jump into costing now. You'll notice the progress has been updated from our playing around with the schedule. This costing section is going to be every single item we costed, and this whole screen is about the budgeted amount versus the actual spend amount and the difference between the two. So that's true for a line by line, category by category level. And it's also this screen that we can do our ordering through. What I'm going to do is show you the simplest form of ordering to start with. So I grab one item, or I can go through and grab several. Really doesn't matter. I'll just grab two for the sake of it. When I'm grabbing them, I'm thinking about them being for the same supplier because they're going to be in the same purchase order. So grab them both and order. And it's going to pre-fill the address. The actual purchasing that comes from this screen is, it's really doing two things. So one, it's physically producing purchase orders. We can also do work orders, but it will come to that. Physically producing purchase orders, we can send them off. It's also receiving them. So what that means is when stuff arrives on site, we can mark it as received, and it'll track how much we've received of it and how much we've spent for that item. So if we've overspent or underspent, it'll know and it'll be able to record that. Hence, we've got the actual quantity and actual totals as 0 now because we've not actually spent anything. What I'm going to do first of all is produce a purchase order. I've got suppliers in here under the contacts section of my account. If you don't, which you probably won't, feel free to just add a new one now. And actually I'm going to do the same. Let's just say, I've got a lot of Bunnings ones. Let's just say Bunnings Melbourne. Add as new contact. And the reason I'm showing you this is it's really easy to add contacts on the go. And it's a great point just to touch on. It'll automatically call the contact by the business name, but if you know a person there, say it's Steve, you can do it like this, and this is the way it'll present it. Contact type, so what are they? It's a supplier, and you can make notes about them in this tab, but the majority of what we'll do is in this details section. It's things like the ABN, and are they registered for GST? I'm sure Bunnings is, I know Bunnings is, but small trades like maybe your painters or plasterers might not be, and it's this that will decide whether or not the purchase orders get GST added to them. Address, city, state, all self-explanatory. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to put a mobile phone in and an email, steve@Bunnings. And save and close. The reason I'm putting these details in is because we can send SMSs and emails to these people, and it's important that those details are in. Cool, Steve's in. And as part of this, I'm going to make a note to myself with this description. It's not essential, but I highly encourage it because it just makes searching for purchase orders that much easier. I'm just going to say what is actually in this order: bricks and timber. We can state to the supplier when it's required by. We can add instructions, so please deliver, at the end of the drive. You can even put in contacts, so contact Bill. You can use these line item notes for color selection. If it's red, number whatever, and say timber, 6 meter lengths, whatever you want, you can specify in this note section. All of this appears on purchase orders. And on that note, if you want to show them the cost that you've allowed, you tick it. By default, that's off because we kind of believe that suppliers, it's really not their business to see what you've allowed. However, this is there for the sake of contractors because oftentimes they'll want to know what they're getting paid. And that said, it's all about the relationship you've got with your suppliers and contractors, so that's entirely up to you. I'm going to allow some delivery cost in here and go save and close. Alternatively, I could go save and send and email it straight away, but it's going to drop that order. It'll tick it as ordered. If I click the tick or any of the blue stuff, it'll just show me purchase order number 442 to Bunnings, Melbourne, what was ordered. And if I want to see the purchase order itself, it's going to be living in here in the purchase order section. And this description, this is why I recommend using them, because if you've got a lot of orders, it lists out here and it makes it life a lot easier. I'm just going to print it for you to show you what it looks like. Again, PDF, Excel, and Word. And these are the orders. Order numbers are automatic. Job numbers are automatic, but can be changed in the details section. And the address would go in here if I'd put it in for this contact. Terms and conditions are automatic, but you can change them too. And you'll notice any notes just sit below. I'll just show you now where the terms and conditions can be changed. And it's just going to be under this cog. While we're in here, if you print an orders list, that will print all the purchase orders and all the work orders, so it acts as a bit of a call forward sheet. I'll just go back to the actual items, and what we're going to do is open this order again and click on it, and we're going to assume it's been delivered on site, or we're going to act as though it has. And I'm going to go received. It's going to say, great, did you receive what you ordered? This is our chance to say, you know, this is the actuals we've paid, or this is what the invoice says. So 42, or we just got 26, whatever it be. Save and close. And that will then flick through to show basically how much we've spent. Everything is shown as a percent as well, and it will update the overall variance. We can now see we've spent exactly 4% of our budget. I'm going to do another one for a work order. And just before I do, I really want to stress the difference between purchase orders and work orders. In our mind, a purchase order is anything going outside your business. So suppliers, contractors, prime examples. Work order is something inside your business. A lot of our users use them to enter timesheets, and you can also produce a physical work order if you want, and that just can be it looks much like a purchase order, but it can be used just to send to someone to request work. The functional difference between the two as well is that if you're connecting with your accounting, the purchase orders sync to your accounting program, work orders do not, and that's intentional. So what I'm going to do is grab, let's say, what do we got for labor? Let's go bricklayer per square meter. Let's say we've got a staff member doing this. Grab it, order it, and work order. We can, if we want, produce the actual work order. What I'm going to say is that we're just ticking it off as complete. A little side note is that if you are looking to use these as a source of entering timesheets, it's really handy to have estimated it as hours to begin with, and that just makes it much easier to compare apples and apples. I'm going to say it's assigned to, and this will typically be a staff member, Bricklayer Bob. No real need to put anything else in here because it's just ticking it off. I can say, how many square meters was it? Looks good. Rate was good. Save and close. It'll just tick it off as 100%. As it's a work order, it'll live in here versus the purchase orders. Fantastic. Now, two final points to cover in this costing screen, and they are: one, what do you do if you want to split or part receive? And plumbing is the prime example. Electrical is another really good one. But let's say you receive an invoice from John. Oops, not what I wanted to do. Receive an invoice from John at John's Plumbing, and click and order. In that case, he's just sent you the invoice. You don't really need to do a purchase order, though you may have earlier on. I'm just going to go as though we haven't, and I'm going to say it's been received. It'll want to know who this is. So John Plum. Oh, he's not in here. We can just add him really quickly. Fantastic. Now, let's say the invoice we've got is for $4,000 ex GST. What we can do is say description. Again, I'm using this just because I think it's great. Rough in only. I'm going to note it here as well. So it's probably less necessary here. And I can now alter this to say either 40% of the total, which will spit it out, or I can just mess with the figure. Basically, all I'm doing is telling it how much we've actually received on this invoice. Save and close. It'll update it to say, hey, great, there's $6,000 outstanding, you've spent $4,000, and 40% of that is what you've done. If we later on receive the other invoice, we can click it, order it, and straight away it's knowing what the variance is. So it's just a little mental check for yourself that if you get an invoice for $6,500, you can go, wait a second, I'm only expecting $6,000, and that can just be a little check for you. Fantastic. Now the final thing we get asked for a little bit is, what if I just go to the store and buy a box of nails? And it's not in here. I can't assign it to anything. What do I do? So let's say in this case, it's going to be just framing nails. Go through into the purchase orders and add. Again, you could create a purchase order just off the bat if you needed one. Same with a work order, but I'm going to go straight through and say, I've been to the store, we've received the item, it's in our hand. Nails from Bunnings. And invoice number if we want to record it and send it to our accounting. But all we're doing is just itemizing it. So nails, 1 box for $50. Now, it'll be a bit clueless as to which category to actually put it into, and that's because this item's straight out of the blank, and it's never seen it before. If we start typing, it'll bring up the categories, and we can choose which one it goes into. If you do leave it blank, it will drop it right down the very bottom into its own category, which is fine if that's what you want, but just be aware that if you leave it blank, that's what it'll do. Save and close. I'm just going to go show you where that's landed. It'll obviously be in here, but it's also landed in our costing and under framing. There it is, nails, one box, $50. Interestingly, the estimated amounts are all zero. I guess that makes sense because we'd never allowed for it. In this instance, that means it shows always as an overrun. So if you'd spent 100% of everything else, it would actually push this category over. Awesome. Now that's costing. One final thing for costing. A lot of the time we get asked for job cost reports, and here they are. In the cog, click print, it'll give you a summary of what's on the screen. While we're in here, if you're transferring from the old to new version and you get a message saying you need a sync with the old version, it's very uncommon this will happen, but you can just click sync with estimate and it just refreshes the costs coming from the estimate page. Just a little side note for those that need it. All right, so we're going to talk about variations now. I'm going to go through into the variations tab and it's going to go, oh, you're still working on your estimate. Once it's accepted, you'll be able to create variations. What on earth does that mean? And that's because if we refer back to this that we talked about earlier, we're still working in stage 2. We have never actually accepted the estimate. And I've intentionally left it this long just to show you how much you can actually do before you lock the estimate. Really the only thing you can't do is variations, and that makes sense because there's no contract in its mind to actually variate from. What I'm going to go through now is how to lock the estimate. In reality, you probably would have locked it a little earlier than this. So if you get this message, this is what it means. Back to view estimate. And the thing that physically tells it it's been signed is we go into this status, and the reason it's hidden in this status is because we really want people to use it. The status is what defines this on the left-hand sidebar. So it defines how your estimates are sorted. We want people to use lead, draft, in progress, not sent, final, etc. as a way of tracking where estimates are up to and really breaking it down into different groups. So if you, for example, have sent estimates but you've not heard back from a client, they'll sit in the group on their own. And you can pick those out really quickly, really easily, and not have to filter through a list of estimates to find them. They'll simply by using this list have been sorted for you. So yeah, we really do want people to use the list. This is where accepted is. And it'll go, hey, that's great. This is when the contract has been signed. It'll put an acceptance date on it. And I'm going to go back to view the job. If we go back to variations now, we don't get the message, but it's still kind of blank, and that's because we haven't added anything yet. Going to add the variation now. And let's say the client wants more downlights in their house. So we quoted on a few, but they need even more. So description, proposed start date on the 1st. Will it delay us? Up to you. Better to be safe than sorry. Any details you want to tell the client about? Keeping in mind, pretty much all of this page is just filling out a form that will then produce a variation document. Almost everything gets seen by the client, with the exception of markup. So if I go downlights, I can grab any of those. And what I can also do is I can add as many lines as I want. So if I want to have variation fees or anything else, I can just itemize it out. The more you show, the more the client sees. Get rid of that one. I'm going to put some markup on this. As I said, the clients don't see that. As with the purchase orders in the last video, we can define which category this goes into. Variations, like the purchase orders, if you leave them blank, will create their own cost center. That's better for the variations, whereas if you have a big variation, say something like a whole extra room that they want, really something big, or a garage or carport or something significant, and you want to manage that and see it in its costing section as its own thing, then I would recommend you leave it blank. However, if it's just something little like this, I'd probably put it where it's supposed to be. You've got your T. Does it belong in the schedule? Yes, it probably does, because this is a labor, has a labor component to it, so it needs to be time-based. I'm going to say save and close. And I'm going to just print this out and show what it looks like. So PDF, Excel, or Word, as always. And there's our variation document. So legally binding variation form, and it's going to have, you know, all the boxes ticked and T's crossed. You know, they're going to sign, name, date. It's going to advise them of their new contract total. The markup that we added is actually included in this unit price just here. There you go. Lovely. Really neat way of doing it. I'm going to say close, and nothing really happens to this variation until we accept it, which is what I'm doing right now. Accepted, save and close. And what that now means is our schedule, if I go to electrical, now has this extra item in it. Our costing, if I go to electrical, same thing, has an extra item. It's even the same name as the previous one. And the invoicing, which we haven't seen yet, but we're in it now, will have the variation allocated in it. And it'll also give you this little pop-up message saying all invoices total this amount. You have X amount left to create invoices for. When you see this, 90% of the time, it's because you've got a variation left to be assigned. The only other possible cause would be if you had your invoice stages and they didn't add to 100%. That'd be the other cause. Lovely, so that's our variations. Last but not least, let's talk about invoicing. Fantastic. So as we just talked about in the variation video, we've got some outstanding money left to assign. That's due to the variation we just accepted. And you'll see in here, our invoice stages are here ready to go. I'm going to open one up. You can grab any variation to any invoice. They've all got a status. I'm going to make this really quickly look a bit more realistic. So let's say deposit, base. So we've received that. We've invoiced this. We're actually a little bit through the job, and they'll sort to the bottom. So the next one, let's see where we got frame. I'm actually going to open that up and include the variation in it. You can make notes if you want. I can say save and close, or save and send. The beauty of save and send in this case, or just emailing it, this button here does the exact same thing, is that it will ask if you want an invoice statement attached to it. So now I'm going to print both the invoice and then the invoice statement and show you what both of those documents look like. So the invoice, first of all, just looks like this. Lovely. And it's got the big word draft because the status of this invoice, if I just flick back really quickly, fixing, status, pending. So we haven't invoiced it yet, so it's a draft. We've done it on purpose this way so that you can print invoices and they don't assign invoice numbers or invoice dates. It's just so you can check it out. I've put a little note down here, and in these payment terms, a lot of our clients put their BSB and account number. I think that's a great idea, and it obviously means you get paid, which is fantastic. But you can change those payment terms. If you go back to the previous screen, invoicing, you can change them up here, payment terms. While I'm in here, this is also where I'm going to print the statement, the invoice statement. This is the one that it was asking us to email. Did we want to email that with the invoice? I'm just going to print it and show you what it looks like. So all it is a summary of your invoices, how much is received so far, how much is invoiced so far, how much is remaining, and also your variations that you've put with this job, even if they've not been accepted, just ones that they know are coming up. Really handy, particularly if the client needs to know, so needs to know what's coming. And it's just a bit more info you can give them to help them out. Lovely. As we go through and change statuses, it will update down here, and we can see how much is remaining, how much is invoiced, and this invoiced percent will feed to this top here so that we can see progress versus variance rather, versus invoiced. Lovely. That's essentially it for invoicing. All right, so we're going to talk now about connecting buildXACT with your accounting software. So I'm just going to go through to my account. We connect with QuickBooks, MyOb, and Xero. In my account, it's just showing Xero and MyOb, and I'm going to go connect with Xero. The real benefit of why you would connect, what's the point? Just while I'm going through and actually connecting for you. The benefit of connecting to Xero in this case is that the purchase orders and the invoices are synced through to save you all that double entry. When you put your details in, if you're logged into your Xero already, or whatever you're using, it won't ask you this. It will have just logged you in straight away. But when you get to this, it'll ask, do you want to allow? And you just say sure. And straight back to buildXACT. That's it, it just needs a tick. When you get here, it will open up a little portal screen, giving you some options. There's a manual about this, but in short, what it's wanting is a start date, and this is set because I've connected to Xero before. For you, more than likely to be today's date. And all it wants to know is just a line in the sand. How far back should it be looking for purchase orders and invoices to sync across? It also wants to know, do you want to sync both purchase orders and invoices, yay or nay? And if you're doing those, what accounts should they be going to? So you can have a flick through your own one, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And finally, what status does the invoice or purchase order need to be in? So for example, if it lands in 0, do you want it to be a draft and have it need to be approved, which is what most of our clients are doing, because that gives you the opportunity to change accounts within Xero or Markup, QuickBooks, whatever you're using. It also gives you the opportunity just to double check it before you send it into your working accounts. But you can also have it as submitted or authorized. Lovely. When it's in there, you can sync using this button up the top, and it's a click on request style sync. So you click it and it sends the data across. You can go into that settings screen. You can get back into this integration screen and view the log, which is saying, the last time you synced to Xero, in this case, it was successful and it synced to this, that, and the other. That's a really handy thing, particularly if you need to check and see what you sent across, or maybe something hasn't appeared and you just want to go in and see why. The actual trigger for things to go across, if I just go into the jobs and all orders and all invoices, which is a really handy little part. So it's invoiced or received invoices. These are client invoices we're talking about. So invoiced or received invoices from the client will go to Xero, versus your purchase orders, where it's anything received, and that's literally it. So because your accounting is really only interested when you have spent money or about to pay for something, that's when the status of received is relevant. You've got goods, you're about to pay for them, or you already have. In the case of invoices, if you've invoiced the client, that usually means that they're about to pay, touch wood, and that means that it's gone to your accounting, and that accounting pack is traditionally looking through your bank feeds, waiting to match that incoming amount with your record that's come from buildXACT. Purchase orders go to your accounting as bills. Invoices go as sales. If you want more information on that, there's pages on our website about the integration and manuals and things like that, or just touch base with us and we can help you out. All right, last but not least, how much is our software? Great, so if I go my account and subscription, this is where you can physically pay for it. Everything's paid online, so we don't do direct debit or checks or anything like that. It's all via credit card online, and you can choose the packs. We've gone through this video series the absolute entirety of the software, so this pack, estimating and jobs, just everything. However, you can buy the two separately if you require, and you can say start here and upgrade to this one later. It's entirely up to you. I'm just going to go to this one. Note these are all the monthly costs, and as mentioned here, we definitely offer discounts for trade associations, partner associations, and if you pay yearly, that's a really good way to save a few bucks as well. So I'm going to go subscribe. Am I a Master Builder HIA? If so, put my number in. Coupons, this is relevant to our partners. If that's not you, then it's not relevant to you really. We can go next. And billing details, just wants to confirm. Most of this will come from your account details. Most of it should be fine. Lastly, it wants to know, do we want to pay monthly or yearly, which is cheaper, as I mentioned. Essentially, the yearly price is 10 months at the monthly price. So you can save yourself those 2 months. One thing to note though, if you're going yearly, you're committing for a whole year. If you're going monthly, you're committing for a whole month. So that's really the difference between the two. You can pay online, and if it's a monthly payment, it's just a recurring credit card payment. If it's a yearly payment, it's just a one-off, and then we notify you when it's time to repay for another year. Lovely. If you've got any questions about that, definitely let us know. Cheers, guys. Bye then.